here. Quick introduction, my friend Josh. I met Josh in 2nd grade. Then we didn't see each other for a long time. And we reconnected recently, and he came to the last couple of these. And the recommendation of one of my board members, Steve Wolf, he said, hey, you should have Josh share a story because it sounds pretty good. I was like, that's a great idea. And so Josh agreed. He just flew in from a trip. He was on to Indiana. He flew in today?
Yesterday.
Yesterday. Just flew in yesterday. And I was like, hey, how about the 23rd of August? He's like, I could probably do that. So Josh lives in Southampton, New York, with his wife, Hannah Faye. So just let's have a round of applause for Josh. Thank you for coming all this way and hanging out with us.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
I'm pretty sure this event pretty much disqualifies me from running for public office at any point in the future, if I would ever consider it. But that's okay. A lot of you know me, a lot of you don't. But regardless, I want you to picture me catatonic, unresponsive, slumped over in a chair. And then after being stimulated with drugs and waking up, picture me just totally disoriented, wondering where the heck I am. Is this something like the afterlife that I wasn't aware of how this would be? In reality, I am in a place called St. Catherine's of Siena Medical Center in Smithtown, New York. And how did I get there? Well, pride goes before the fall. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I had set up, what I'd been setting up in my life. What you need to know is about the quarter life angst that I had. And I don't know how old everybody is here, but in the summer of 2008, I was 25 years old. And I was wondering if I had anything to show for the years that I have lived so far. What am I really doing that has any purpose? So I've been living a pretty rootless existence. Just that past winter and spring, I had moved to Pennsylvania and then back real quick. So I was just all over the place, up for whatever, spontaneous, snowboarding whenever I could, or doing anything. Just living kind of like Peter Pan. In fact, my sisters would say I had Peter Pan syndrome. So I had moved to Pennsylvania. My friends were there. I had some family there. A church of which I was a founding member was there. And also there was a girl there. And so that'll figure into the story a little later. And I just feel like this thing, where's John at? I think this thing is just gonna like fall over on me, so I'm gonna hold it. But thank you for bringing it.
You're welcome. Okay. You can kick it over, Josh.
Thank you. Anyway, summer of 2008. A couple things happened that contributed to this whole quarter life angst. My sister was getting married. Now I'm the first of 5 with 4 sisters behind me. And so my sister, who's younger than me, younger than I am, is getting married. And, you know, that is like adding to this feeling like, what the heck am I doing with my life? So I kind of wanted to be married, but at the same time I did not feel like I wasn't really established, couldn't handle a family, right? And then, also that summer, I told you before that I had been a founding member of a church out in Pennsylvania. Well, this guy who was a spiritual mentor to me in a lot of ways, he passed away really suddenly. And a lot of us took it quite hard. His name was Colin Smith. And when you lose a spiritual guide, it's really unmooring. And especially if you haven't dealt with a lot of death in your life, it's bringing all these issues to you, like, oh my goodness, like life just ends so quickly. This guy had been out on a walk. Who was telling me that they were at Piedmont or knew someone at Piedmont school? You could go to Piedmont, is that what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, this guy, this pastor of mine, had moved down to Piedmont, and he was teaching Hebrew. Carp knows him. Carp knew him. And anyway, he's out on a walk, said to his wife, I gotta lie down, I don't feel too good, and just passed away. And it was an unmooring experience for me, for some friends of mine. So these things happened over that summer of 2008. I'm feeling like my life is just not amounting to anything, right? So I'm at my sister's wedding. I'm singing for my sister's wedding. That's my training. I'm a singer. And after the wedding, this older woman comes up to me. And I had known her since I was a kid. And she said, "So what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I have this degree in music. I could be a teacher. I don't really know if I should do that." And she tells me, "Well, Hawthorne Christian Academy is looking for a music teacher." And I was like, "Oh, really?" And like Jason said, I had gone to Hawthorne. That's where I met Jason. I'd been there from K through second grade. I believe I knew Matt from there too. We used to carpool, which is crazy. So I started looking into it, and I really pestered them. But come to find out, like, they were really struggling. They really didn't have a lot of good candidates to be the music teacher. So I pestered them hard, and I got the job. So it looked like my desire for meaningful work was about to be fulfilled, right? And then, I've got my first job as a teacher, and then it looked like also that maybe my desire for marriage and family life could be fulfilled too, because I don't know if I told you, but I moved to Pennsylvania. The reason was because there was a girl. Well, I started talking to her more frequently. So from my perspective, maybe this is going to go somewhere. It wasn't going anywhere. But I thought, hey, while I'm on a roll, you know what? I'm going to start grad school. I got my first job as a teacher, but let's start taking graduate courses in philosophy too. Let's just pile things on. Not wise. So I moved to New Jersey. I'm staying with family friends that I had known since I was literally a newborn. And the agreement is that I'm going to live there, until I can get on my feet, until I can get established in the area. But the problem is I'm having such a great time living with them, reconnecting with them. Their son was someone I used to babysit when at one point we were next door neighbors in my life. So it's great to reconnect. They've got another younger son who's just hilarious. He's like the kid brother I never had. So I'm just having a great time. I'm like, I don't want to live alone and not have like family, So my mind is already just pulled in so many different directions, if you can't tell already, right? And since we're moving pretty quick here, does anybody need anything clarified? Because from here on out, it's kind of wild. I think we're gonna have Q&A back then in a little while. All right, so besides all the events with death and marriages and new job and lesson planning and grad school and girl chasing and temporary living situation and not having a plan to earn enough income to both pay rent and pay back my student loans, with all that going on, there's one more notable thing to pile on. And that is that my alma mater, that I'm not going to mention the name of, but they were going through hardships, decreased enrollment. And the way that this affected me was my brother-in-law, who had just married my sister that very summer, was teaching there. And there had been a meeting the previous spring where they let everybody on the faculty, anyone who was an employee, know, hey, we've got a hard time coming up. But don't go looking for other jobs. Nobody's getting laid off. Don't worry about it. So my brother-in-law took that at face value. But you can't always promise that. And sure enough, my brother-in-law, newlywed, gets laid off. And the way it affected me was, it's my sister, and they had been planning on her finishing up college tuition free because he's a full-time employee. All of a sudden that is just ripped out from under them. And so I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but I was pretty angry about the way they were treated. I was angry at what went down. And the important thing to know about this is that the night before school started, the night before I was due to start my first day teaching, I was up writing an email to make a case for undoing what I saw as a huge injustice to them. There's a very particular aspect that I thought they were getting mistreated about. And so I went to school the next day, September 3rd, my birthday, 26th birthday, my first day of ever teaching, on 45 minutes of sleep. And from there, it's just a downward spiral over the next 6 weeks. Honestly, I can't believe I lasted that long, 6 weeks. And I want to speed over this so we can get to the meaty stuff, but and we can backtrack later if I need to. But I'm on no sleep. I start skipping meals, throwing my body way off, and I don't know if anyone's read the Steve Jobs biography. I just finished listening to it the other day. He actually used to induce a kind of euphoria by fasting. And I heard that and I was like, that makes sense. I understand what that's about. Because I was skipping meals. I was totally erratic. Just screwing up my body in all kinds of ways. I should mention, like I said, I'm chasing a girl. I'm also turning down another girl who had shown interest in me. So literally there are two women out there that one of whom can say I was literally crazy about her, and the other can say I was literally insane to turn her down.
It's true.
So, the teaching job, Hawthorne Christian Academy. It was fun. It was a blast. Some of those students are actually here tonight. A couple guys came out. Excited to see them. And I loved teaching. I was kind of good at winging it with the lesson plans. So I could hold a room while I was teaching. But I wasn't necessarily fulfilling my job description. Not doing so well on content. Because like I said, my mind is so scattered. But one girl I remember said, "Mr. H, you're my favorite teacher." And that'll do stuff to your ego. You're a new teacher, you're someone's favorite teacher? Wow, I must be doing pretty good. So the mounting mania, the growing ego with which to take on the world, right? Of the rapport that I have with students. And I wasn't everybody's favorite. There were some students that were like, you know what, we're not really learning anything from you. And they were right to say that. But I've got rapport with other students, so that's okay. I'm taking spontaneous trips back home to Long Island and back out to Pennsylvania. Usually on the weekends, but I remember at least once just completely missing school because I'm on a trip. So things are spiraling out of control in my head and in my life. And finally, at long last, the family I was living with, they called my dad. I had hit this point of just being so erratic. They're like, you need to come get him. So there are whole conversations from that point in life that I just don't remember. I don't remember having them. There were probably episodes of anger that I can't remember, and it's regretful, but there are some relationships that have never been the same since that time. So our sin still has consequences, even long after it's dealt with. So my dad drives from Long Island. My sister, Chelsea, drives from Pennsylvania. And we all have this conversation in which I must be just spouting nonsense. I can't really remember. I thought I was in trouble. My dad and my sister show up out of nowhere. What's going on? What'd I do? Well, finally I go to bed. And I just want to tell you, here's the best way to describe my mental state at that point. I'm essentially half asleep, running on adrenaline and willpower all the time, right? So have you heard the phrase, lost the plot? Lost the plot? Well, I had lost the plot. But every other plot was fair game. And what I mean is that any story beat and any plot device from any movie or TV show I'd ever seen or any book I'd ever read would find its way into my head. And that is a crazy place to be when your synapses are so fried that you're starting to not distinguish things. So I'm talking stuff like The Matrix, The Chronicles of Narnia, 9/11 trauma. Some of you know what that's about, where that's just a kind of a defining experience in your life when you were young. People of a certain age just understand that. There's visions in my head of apocalyptic things from the Bible. I kind of grew up in that kind of world. So there's starting to be no distinction between my daydreams, my dreams, and reality. Does anybody here read Chesterton? G.K. Chesterton? Matt? He wrote an essay called The Maniac. And in it he says, the madman is not the man who has lost his reason. The madman is the man who has lost everything except his reason. Unquote. That is to say, it's not your reason alone. It's not our reason alone that keeps us sane. It's our reason that is applied to the story we tell ourselves about the world. So depending on the story you have, you might be totally rational, but you might be crazy. So, for example, in a horror movie, right, the rules of the story are just tweaked a little from the real world. Maybe there's a being that lives in a mirror or something, and in that world, it makes sense. For Christians who anticipate a kind of loosely biblical apocalypse, they're looking at the future to a time when they're expecting things to happen that have never happened before. The rules are going to be tweaked. So, Chesterton also writes, everyone who's had the misfortune to talk with people in the heart or on the edge of mental disorder knows that their most sinister quality is a horrible clarity of detail, a connecting of one thing with another in a map more elaborate than a maze. You guys have seen the meme, I think it comes from the movie Pacific Rim. The guy's got like the map on the wall behind him. He's like, it's like me trying to explain whatever it is. You seen that meme? Some of you have.
It's always sunny.
Oh, it's from It's Always Sunny? All right, thank you. Well, that was certainly true of me during this time. I was seeing hidden meanings where there were none. I was picking words apart in conversations. For example, I was wondering why September and October are the 9th and 10th months, when their prefixes are clearly better matched to the 7th and 8th months, right? October, octo. I didn't know anything about that, but those are the kinds of things that would occupy my mind. That's crazy. Anyway, so that night, I'm still hyped up. I'm in the house with that family, my sister, my dad. I can't sleep, and around 4 or 5 in the morning, I wander down to the kitchen of this house where I'm living. And I'm sort of sleepwalking, you know, because that's my state, pretty much my default state at that point. And I'm not going to explain every little detail of that time in my head because I do remember a lot of it, and it is freaky. But I suddenly, like, in that kitchen, catch a whiff of something very distinctive, and it's probably just food that's stored on the counter. But this feeling of dread just washes over me that everybody in the house is in danger somehow because of what I'm smelling or imagining I'm smelling or whatever it is. And so I can't really make any sense of anything except that feeling of dread, and I start yelling for the family and for my sister and my dad, get out, get out, get out. So imagine you're just sleeping and that's what you hear from downstairs. And I don't know, who knows what else I screamed that night. But years later, my wife told me that she heard from a former Hawthorne Christian student that I had been screaming at the sky. And really, I was just screaming up the stairs. Not much better. So my dad rushes me home. And I'm pretty sure he takes me right to the hospital to get tested for drugs, because somebody had asked him whether I was on drugs. No, that's clear. It probably would have been more of a relief to him to know I was on drugs at that point than that his firstborn son is going nuts. I can't settle down enough to sleep. And finally, after many lunatic ravings, my body just starts to shut down. I'm falling asleep mid-sentence. I'm starting sentences and starting new sentences in the middle of them. And my dad knows that since I'm over 18, he's gonna, if he calls anybody, he's gonna have no say in what happens next. But he has no choice but to call 911. And at the hospital, they sedated me. And the next thing I perceive is waking up in this place where we started the story, which is at this medical center. And I was in the less crazy, kind of the more calm of two mental health wings at St. Catherine's Hospital. And like I said, I was totally disoriented. I thought I heard another person say that they had died, so I didn't know if I'm some kind of like, am I in some kind of like purgatorial afterlife? What is going on? You know, you're just waking up without a clue as to where you are. And it's only when I start to be a little more lucid that I realize my parents and other people are visiting me. Well, you know, this can't be the afterlife because my parents can't just like go back and forth, you know. So my parents are coming to see me, and eventually my mind starts to reform because I've been sleeping. If I'm remembering correctly, a man became aware. A man who worked at the hospital became aware that I'm a musician, so he lends me his guitar. So I've got my hymn book in there. I'm playing and singing, and I'm pretty sure it's surprised some of the nurses because when I came in, I was just like, you know, falling everywhere and not really awake. So, you know, I spent about 2 weeks there, finally got the ability to sign myself out. And we found a doctor that wanted to decrease all the drugs they had put me on. And eventually I got completely off them. and I don't take so much usually as an Advil these days. I'm not really big on taking anything, but as I start to get clearer, the despair of what I had lost starts to set in. I couldn't go back to work. I couldn't muster up the joie de vivre to get in front of students again, right? My perception of myself is just completely shattered knowing that this type of thing could happen to me. My mannerisms had changed. The way I walk had changed. I was not sharp anymore because of the medicine. And I was barely functional. And as far as I was concerned, that dream of marriage was a lost cause now. I remember asking my dad, who would want me now? And all my old doubts about whether I was accepted and loved by God, which is something I had fought against my entire life, came flooding right back. And foolishly, I concluded that, well, if my faith hadn't been strong enough to maintain me at what I had considered was the pinnacle of my life up until that point, then I just must not be able to have the kind of faith that saves. For a while, I went to Pennsylvania, stayed with my sister and her husband for a little while. During that time, she had surgery to remove a tumor from her leg. So my family's going through some crap right now. We got cancer. We got a crazy son. That January, Obama's first term starts. I usually just spent my days trying to get out of bed. And then I usually just watch TV all the time. But there was this glimmer of hope during that time. And here's how it started. I was friends with a former professor in the music department at my old college. And one day I visited his office. Now, none of my friends or family, they were kind of trying to get used to this new, depressed, dark countenance Josh as the new normal, right? They're expecting I'm never going to come back. But this man, David McGrew, he eulogized me to myself. He told me what he remembered of who I was to him before. Someone who invited others into his schemes to hang out. Someone whom he believed had one of the most beautiful male voices in the music department at that time when I'd been there at school, which is nice to hear at that time. I don't remember everything else he said, but he just wanted to remember me to myself, even if I never got to be that person again. I moved back home. It was too depressing for my sister to recover and try to deal with me, so I moved back home. And my parents, who were totally amazing during this whole time. There are so many names I could bring up of people who were incredible during this time. You can't do them all justice, and I'm already taking long enough. But my parents, they forced me to get a job. I'm not going to just waste away at home. So I start working a cash register at BJ's Wholesale Club, and that's about all I could handle at that point. I can't even believe they hired me because honestly, like for the interview process, it's completely stone-faced, one-word answers. So they must have been just hard up for people. But eventually my personality starts coming back. Right? I start hating things again. I hate this vest. You know, I'm bringing a fan to work because it's so hot. So my personality starts to return. Eventually I start working the membership and customer service counter. And one day, months later, I get a call from a friend at the charter school where my mom worked at the time. And she told me they need a long-term music sub, and she asked, do I know anyone interested? And to my surprise, and probably to the surprise of my family and friends, I was interested. It's my first interest in getting back into music in the same way that I had been before. And as far as my spiritual depression, I'd adopted as a motto what Jesus' disciple Peter once said. At that point, many of Jesus' followers had left him, and Jesus says to his disciples, do you also want to go away? And Peter answered, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. So that was me, unsure of my standing before God, but saying, to whom else shall I go? I knew I didn't believe anything else. My friend Kevin would get me out of the house. He was great too during this whole time. Ever since I'd come home, he'd call up, he'd be like, yo bro, we're gonna go to the mall. I'd be like, no, I don't feel like it. You better get in the shower, I'm gonna be there 20 minutes. He took me to a Presbyterian church a half hour away, and one Sunday right before communion, the pastor said that the Lord's Supper was for you whether your faith was strong, whether your faith in Christ was strong or weak. And I knew I still believed that Jesus' death and his perfect life were my only hope of standing before God. So once again, I started to break that bread and drink that wine with other Christians. Started to reckon myself among God's people once again. And it was a time of holding on to objective truth and trusting God, my Father, to supply the subjective assurance that I was his child. Maybe a little later it was going to come. And that's probably the case for a lot of pensive Christians, a lot of Christians who doubt themselves. So I do have some wisdom that I gleaned from all this. First off, stay humble. It's good to want to offer something worthwhile to the world, but in my case it was pride. That idea, I should be farther along than I am here at the ripe old age of 25. And I still reckon with that every day. Big dreams can often be delusions of grandeur. Another thing is to be direct and forthright. It applies to everything, especially as men. But if you're single here, let me just encourage you, be direct with women. Just ask them out. You can prepare, but go through all the fumbling and stumbling over your words. Don't stalk them. Don't send messages. Don't hover around. Don't place yourself in their path. Just ask. See if it's a good match and move on to the next phase. Whether that is, this has been nice, or, hey, we should get married and start a family. Another thing is know your limits. Take care of your body the way God has designed it to be taken care of. It's important. This could happen to anybody. I kind of live in this weird space, right, where nothing remotely like this has happened in the 10 years since. So should I be reckoned among the crazies or among the normals? I don't know. Hopefully the story helps no matter where you're at. But I really believe you don't sleep, you don't eat. You'll be in the same boat. So take care of yourself. Another thing, take action every day. Not toward monumental things, but toward mundane faithfulness. Honor your basic commitments. It's a day in and day out thing. Most of life is not big. It's pretty small. And lastly, seek your glory in the right things. In the end, our highest end is to know and glorify God. Not to make a name for ourselves, not to build a business empire, not to earn accolades. God says, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, let not the mighty man boast in his might, and let not the rich man boast in his riches. Let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me. That's what God says. Not long after taking communion once again for the first time, I became the music director at that church. I'm in my 9th year of doing that. That's Grace Presbyterian Church in Watermill, and that's what I do. And now I'm also in business as a personal coach, specializing in career mapping. I have the same old mannerisms, and my walk is pretty much back to normal. It's been a crazy 10 years, and I just hope that my story can help anybody, no matter what point they're at in their life. You guys have been great. Thanks.
Thanks, Josh. Does anybody have any questions for Josh about his story? Anything they were wondering or want clarification on, or just, hey, yeah, me too. Like, we're going to be around hanging out, talking. Josh will be here, so if you do think of something later on that you want to ask him, please feel free to ask him. Yeah. Thank you, Josh. Thanks. So we're going to keep hanging out. Probably get some cigars going, put some music on, and just maybe talk about something you heard. Maybe something kind of stuck in your mind and you wanted to just talk about with these guys. I'm sure that at least half of you have experienced something like what Josh has been through and had something to say about it. If not, just listen and hear what other people are saying. But, hey man, thanks for being so honest with us. We really appreciate it. And yeah, as you were.
guys all grew up with him?
Oh, awesome. What do you do? I don't think I caught your name yet. Jonathan. Jonathan Kendall.
Kendall?
Yes.
How do you Hey, look at that.
Jay, the guy who wears
Mr. Walmart.
he's guy in a store church, so that's where my family and I go.
Oh, back.
Yeah, he's my primary connection. And so I worship with all